At 11:47 p.m., Marco Duca stared at two words that froze his blood. I can't breathe. The message came from the one person who brought light into his dark empire. Elena, the schoolteacher who made the most dangerous man in Naples believe in redemption. 3 months ago, he'd saved her from a monster. Tonight, that monster had returned to finish what he started. Marco's hands trembled as he read the location tracker. The warehouse, Adrian's territory. The rain hammered against the windows of Marco Duca's penthouse office like 1,000 desperate fingers trying to break through. He sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing ledgers that most men in Naples would kill to never see. Numbers that represented power, territory, and control. The empire he'd built with his own blood, and the blood of those foolish enough to challenge him. At 34, Marco had become the name whispered in fear across the city. The Duca family controlled the port, the construction contracts, and the political machine that kept Naples running beneath its legitimate surface. He wore expensive suits tailored in Milan, drove cars that cost more than most homes, and commanded loyalty from men who would die at his word. But tonight, none of it mattered. His phone vibrated on the desk at 11:47 p.m. The screen illuminated with a message that made his heart stop. Elena, I can't breathe. 2 words. 11 characters, an entire world collapsing. Marco's chair crashed backward as he surged to his feet, already dialing her number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. He tried again, nothing. A curse exploded from him as he grabbed his jacket and the Glock from his desk drawer. His mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Elena never asked for help. Never. In the 3 months since he'd met her, she'd maintained her fierce independence. Their relationship evolved from weary gratitude to tentative friendship, to something neither of them had dared name aloud. Until 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, in the garden of his villa outside the city, she'd kissed him. Not the careful, testing kiss of uncertainty, but the kind that spoke of decision, of choosing him despite everything she knew about who he was and what he did. I see you, Marco, she'd whispered against his lips. Not the reputation, not the empire. You, and I'm not afraid. Those words had undone him more completely than any bullet ever could. Now she was in danger, and every instinct he'd honed in 20 years of surviving the Naples underworld screamed that time was running out. Marco pulled up the tracking app on his phone, the one he'd installed on Elena's device after the incident 3 months ago. She'd agreed, understanding the threat still existed. She understood that Adrian Valente didn't forgive or forget. The location marker blinked red on his screen. Porto Industrial, Warehouse 7. His blood turned to ice. That was Valente territory, or what used to be Valente territory, before Marco had systematically dismantled their operations, after Adrian put his hands on Elena the first time. The warehouse district was supposed to be abandoned and cleared out. It was a demilitarized zone in the unspoken war between their families. Unless Adrian had been planning this, waiting and watching. Marco's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He'd underestimated the bastard's obsession. He thought the warnings he'd delivered, the broken bones, the destroyed businesses, and the very clear message that Elena Rossi was untouchable would be enough. He'd been wrong. The elevator descended to the underground garage, where his men kept watch around the clock. Santo, his second-in-command, straightened immediately when he saw Marco's expression. Boss, get everyone now. Full arms. We're going to the old port. Santo didn't ask questions. He'd been with Marco since they were teenagers running protection rackets in the Spanish Quarter. He knew that look. How many men? All of them. Marco's voice was cold and controlled. The fury compressed into something deadly. And Santo, we're going in loud. I don't care about discretion. I don't care about consequences. We get her out. Understanding flashed across Santo's scarred face. Everyone in Marco's inner circle knew about Elena, though few had met her. They knew she was different. They knew Marco had changed since she'd entered his life. He was quicker to negotiate, slower to violence, and actually considering futures that extended beyond the next territorial dispute. They also knew what Marco would do to anyone who hurt her. Within 4 minutes, 3 SUVs roared out of the garage, carrying 12 of Marco's most lethal soldiers. Marco drove the lead vehicle himself, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind forcing down panic to focus on tactics. He navigated the rain-slick streets with the precision of someone who knew every alley and shortcut in Naples. The city blurred past late-night cafes, closed shops, and the ancient buildings that had witnessed centuries of violence and survival. His phone rang. It was Luca, his tech specialist. "Talk to me," Marco barked. "I'm tracking her phone. Signal is weak but holding. Warehouse 7, northeastern corner, second floor. Boss, I'm picking up 4 other devices in that location. Maybe 5. 5 against 1. 5 men and Elena." The image of her, small and defiant, flashed through his mind. Those brown eyes that saw through all his carefully constructed walls. Elena, who taught literature to teenagers in a failing school. Elena, who volunteered at the shelter on weekends. Elena, who'd looked at him that first night, bloodied and shaking from Adrian's attack, and still managed to say thank you with her dignity intact. The night he'd met her replayed in his mind with crystal clarity. 3 months earlier, Marco had been leaving a late meeting at one of his legitimate businesses. It was a restaurant in the Chia district when he heard the scream. Not a playful shriek or drunken yell, but genuine terror. His bodyguards had moved to investigate, but Marco waved them back and followed the sound himself into a narrow street behind the restaurant. What he found made his blood boil. A woman was pressed against a wall, trying to fight off a man who had her wrist twisted at a painful angle. Another man stood watch, laughing. "Come on, Elena," the first man was saying, his voice slurred with alcohol and entitlement. "Stop being difficult. You know we're meant to be together. You know you still love me. Get off me, Adrian." She tried to knee him, but he blocked it, slamming her back against the brick wall hard enough to make her cry out. That's when Marco intervened. "Let her go." 2 words spoken quietly. Both men turned. Adrian recognized him now. The spoiled son of Jeppe Valente, a rival operator with delusions of grandeur, sneered. "Duca, this doesn't concern you. This is between me and my fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," the woman gasped. 3 years, Adrian. I left you 3 years ago. You don't get to leave me." Adrian's grip tightened, possessive and cruel. "You don't get to." Marco moved with the speed that had kept him alive in a deadly business. One moment, Adrian was holding the woman. The next, he was on the ground with Marco's knee on his chest and Marco's gun pressed under his chin. She said no. Marco's voice was arctic. "That means you walk away. You don't call. You don't follow. You forget she exists." Clear? Adrian's friend reached for a weapon, but Santo materialized from the shadows, his own gun already drawn. "Don't. Do you know who my father is?" Adrian sputtered, trying to maintain bravado with a Glock pressed against his throat. "I know who I am," Marco replied. "And I know that if I ever see you near this woman again, your father will be identifying you through dental records. Nod if you understand." Adrian nodded. Marco stood, hauling the younger man up by his collar and shoving him toward his friend. "Leave now." They left, stumbling over themselves in their haste. Marco turned to the woman, still pressed against the wall. Her chest was heaving, her dark hair disheveled, and a bruise was already forming on her cheekbone. She was beautiful in a quiet way. Not the artificial glamour of the women who usually surrounded him, but something genuine and real. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her hand trembled as she touched her face. "Thank you. I thank you. Can I call someone for you? Family? Friends?" "No." The word came quickly and firmly. "I'm fine. I just need to get home. I'll drive you." "That's not necessary." "It is." Marco's tone left no room for argument. He might come back or he might be waiting. "Let me make sure you get home safely." She studied him for a long moment, those brown eyes assessing. She should have been terrified. He was a stranger who had just held a gun to someone's throat in a dark alley. Instead, she seemed to be weighing him, measuring something beneath the surface. "Okay," she finally said. "Thank you, mister." "Marco, just Marco, Elena." She accepted his offered hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite the tremor. Elena Rossi. Now the memory dissolved as Marco's SUV screeched around a corner, the port district rising before them. The old warehouses loomed like sleeping giants. Their broken windows and graffitied walls were a testament to years of neglect. Warehouse 7 stood at the end of a crumbling pier, waves crashing against the pilings below. No lights, no obvious guards. But Marco knew better. Adrian would have men positioned, watching the approaches. He parked a block away and gathered his team. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead as he laid out the plan in quick, sharp sentences. "Santo, take half the men around back. Seal every exit. I don't want anyone getting out with her as a hostage. Luca, cut the power to the whole block. Give us darkness to work with." Marco checked his watch. 12:03 a.m., 16 minutes since Elena's message. 16 minutes of not knowing if she was alive, hurt, or terrified. Move fast, move quiet until I give the signal. Then we go loud and we finish this. He met each man's eyes. No mistakes. We get her out alive, and we make sure Adrian Valente never threatens anyone again. The men dispersed with military precision, weapons drawn, moving through shadows like predators. Marco approached from the front, Santo at his side, 3 more soldiers fanning out behind them. The warehouse door hung partially open, an invitation or a trap, probably both. He could hear voices inside. Male voices raised in cruel laughter, and beneath that, a sound that made his trigger finger itch. Elena's labored breathing, punctuated by what might have been sobs or gasps of pain. Every muscle in Marco's body screamed to charge in, guns blazing. But that's what Adrian would expect. That's how Elena could get killed in the crossfire. He forced himself to think, to plan. He had to be the strategist who'd built an empire, rather than the man whose entire world was breathing raggedly somewhere in that darkness. "Now, Luca," he murmured into his radio. The lights died. Shouts of confusion erupted from inside the warehouse. Marco counted to 3, enough time for eyes to adjust, for panic to set in, for formation to break. Then he kicked the door fully open and moved. The warehouse interior was a maze of crates and old machinery. It was illuminated only by the ambient light from the Naples skyline filtering through broken windows. Marco's eyes adjusted to the darkness and picked out movement. 4 men scrambling for weapons, flashlights clicking on. And there in the center of the space, tied to a metal chair beneath a single beam of moonlight from a skylight above, was Elena. Her head hung forward, hair covering her face. Her hands were bound behind her. Even from this distance, Marco could see the rope around her throat. It was pulled tight enough to restrict, but not quite kill. A slow, agonizing torture. Adrian Valente stood beside her, one hand on the rope, his face illuminated by his phone's glow. He was talking, but Marco couldn't hear the words over the roaring in his ears. "Police," one of Adrian's men shouted, mistaking the coordinated assault for law enforcement. "Not police," Marco's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Worse." Adrian's head snapped up. Even in the dim light, Marco saw recognition, then fear, then desperate calculation cross his face. "Duca," Adrian's voice tried for confidence, but cracked slightly. "This is between me and Elena. Family business. You should let her go now, and maybe you live. You think you can just." Adrian's words died, as red targeting lasers from multiple weapons painted his chest. Santo and the team had moved into position, surrounding them. "I'm not negotiating," Marco said. His voice was absolutely calm, absolutely lethal. "You have 3 seconds to step away from her. You shoot me, she dies." Adrian's hand tightened on the rope. Elena made a strangled sound, her body jerking. Marco's gun never wavered. "Wrong. You hurt her. You die slow. You let her go. You die quick. Those are your options. You're bluffing. You wouldn't risk it." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Adrian screamed and collapsed, clutching his leg where Marco's bullet had shattered his kneecap. The rope fell slack as his hands lost their grip. Marco was moving before Adrian hit the ground. He crossed the distance to Elena in seconds while his men opened fire on Adrian's soldiers. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Muzzle flashes, shouted orders, the crack of bullets hitting concrete and metal. None of it mattered. Marco's hands were gentle as he lifted Elena's face, carefully loosening the rope around her throat. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, glazed with pain and oxygen deprivation, but alive. "Marco," she breathed, the word barely a whisper. "I've got you." He was already cutting the bonds on her wrists with his knife, gathering her against his chest as her body went limp. "I've got you, Elena. You're safe now. Stay with me, amor. Stay with me." Her fingers clutched weakly at his jacket. He said, "You'd never find me in time." He was wrong. Marco pressed his lips to her forehead, feeling the rapid flutter of her pulse. He was wrong about everything. The firefight lasted less than seconds. Marco's men were professionals. They were trained, equipped, and motivated by their boss's obvious desperation. Adrian's hired muscle were thugs loyal only to money, and they broke quickly when it became clear they were outgunned and outmatched. "Boss," Santo's voice called out. "We're clear." Marco stood, lifting Elena into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and the way she curled into him, seeking warmth and safety, made his chest tighten. "What about him?" Santo gestured to Adrian, who was trying to crawl away despite his shattered knee. He was leaving a trail of blood across the concrete floor. Marco looked at the man who had terrorized Elena for years. He tracked her, hunted her, refused to let her live in peace. He had kidnapped and tortured the woman Marco loved. The old Marco, the one who existed before a night 3 months ago, would have ended it here. Quick, brutal, final. But Elena had changed him. Make sure he survives, Marco said quietly. Long enough to stand trial for kidnapping. Make sure everyone knows what he did. Valente's reputation won't survive his son being exposed as the kind of man who tortures women. It was a different kind of death sentence. Jep Valente valued image above all else. Having his son publicly revealed as a violent stalker would destroy them more completely than any bullet. Understood, boss. Marco carried Elena toward the exit, his men forming a protective perimeter around them. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The city lights reflected off wet pavement, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. It was the police responding to reports of gunfire. Too late, as always. Santo had already called their doctor, the one kept on retainer for situations where hospitals asked too many questions. But looking at Elena's pale face, feeling how shallowly she breathed, Marco made a decision. Change of plans. Take us to Hospital Del Mar. Emergency entrance. Boss, the questions. I don't care. Marco's tone was absolute. She needs proper care. Everything else we handle later. The SUV raced through the Naples streets. Santo drove, while Marco kept Elena cradled against him in the back seat. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes gripping his hand, sometimes whispering fragments that tore at him. Thought I'd die before I could tell you. Shh, don't talk. Save your strength. Need to say it. Her eyes opened clearer now, focusing on his face. Marco Duca, I love you. Even knowing everything. I love you. His throat closed. In his world, love was weakness. It was leverage. A vulnerability that got exploited. He'd watched his father use his mother's love as a leash. He'd seen men betray empires for women who didn't love them half as much as they pretended. He'd sworn never to be that weak. But Elena wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't demanding or manipulating. She was simply telling him her truth, even as she struggled to breathe, even knowing what he was and what loving him might cost. I love you, Lucia said. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but absolutely true. And I swear to you, Elena, no one will ever hurt you again. Never again. Her lips curved in a small smile. My dangerous man, your dangerous man, he confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. The emergency room at Hospital Del Mar erupted into controlled chaos when Marco carried Elena through the doors. Nurses rushed forward with a gurney, doctors shouting orders. It was the organized ballet of medical professionals doing what they did best. What happened? A doctor demanded as they transferred Elena from Marco's arms. She was strangled and beaten. I don't know what else. Marco's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline crashing. Help her. Sir, you need to step back. I'm not leaving her. Santo appeared at his shoulder. Boss, police are coming. We should go. You handle it. Marco's eyes never left Elena as they wheeled her toward the trauma bay. Get lawyers. Get whoever needs to be paid or threatened. I'm staying with her, Marco. Elena's hand reached out and found his. Don't kill anyone for me. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She was brutalized and broken, and she was worried about his soul. No promises, he said gently. But for you, I'll try. Then they took her behind double doors that he couldn't follow through. Marco was left standing in a hospital hallway. His expensive suit was soaked with rain and blood. He was surrounded by staring nurses and approaching security. Santo handled it with the efficiency that made him invaluable. Discreet phone calls to the hospital administrator. A carefully worded story about a random attack. A heroic rescue and money changing hands. The security footage from the warehouse was already being scrubbed by Luca's team. Marco answered the police's questions with the smooth lies of a man practiced in deception. Yes, he'd found her. No, he didn't see the attackers clearly. Yes, he'd be happy to provide a statement tomorrow. At the station, they didn't believe him, but they couldn't prove otherwise. And in Naples, sometimes that was enough. Hours crawled past. Marco sat in a private waiting room that Santo had secured. His mind replayed every moment, every choice that had led here. Every time he'd let Adrian Valente live when he should have eliminated the threat permanently. He'd shown mercy, and Elena had paid the price. Mr. Duca. Marco surged to his feet as the doctor entered. The woman, Dr. Castellano, according to her badge, looked exhausted but professionally composed. How is she? She's stable. The strangulation caused significant trauma to her throat and temporary oxygen deprivation. But there is no permanent damage to her trachea or vocal cords. She has bruised ribs, contusions, and signs of torture that I'm legally obligated to report. Report whatever you need to, Marco cut her off. Just tell me she'll recover. Dr. Castellano's expression softened slightly. Physically, yes. She'll need time, pain management, and possibly some therapy for her throat. Psychologically, that's not my expertise. But trauma like this leaves marks that don't show on X-rays. When can I see her? She's sleeping now. We've given her sedatives for the pain. You can sit with her, but she won't wake for several hours. Marco followed the doctor through sterile corridors to a private room. It was another favor secured by Santo's efficient distribution of resources. Alina lay in the hospital bed, small and fragile against white sheets. Her throat was bandaged, an IV running into her arm, but she was breathing steadily. She was alive. Marco sank into the chair beside her bed and took her hand, carefully mindful of the bruises on her wrist. Dr. Castellano paused at the door. Mr. Duca, whoever did this to her, I hope you make sure they never get the chance again. They won't, Marco promised. When they were alone, he allowed himself to fully feel the terror that had driven him through the last few hours. His composure cracked, and he brought Elena's hand to his lips, pressing kisses to her knuckles. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. That I didn't protect you better. That loving me put you in danger. She didn't answer, lost in medicated sleep. But her fingers twitched slightly in his grip, as if, even unconscious, she knew he was there. Marco had never prayed. His world didn't have room for divine intervention. But in that moment, sitting beside Elena's hospital bed, he made promises to whatever force might be listening. Promises to be better, to use his power differently, to build something worthy of the woman who'd chosen to love him despite everything. Outside the window, dawn broke over Naples. The city woke to another day of beauty and corruption, art and violence, the eternal dance that had defined it for millennia. But in that hospital room, something shifted. Marco Duca, the man who had built an empire on fear and force, found himself hoping for a different kind of future. One where Elena could wake up safe, where they could build something together that wasn't soaked in blood and shadows. One where love wasn't a weakness to be exploited, but a strength that could change everything. The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, marking Elena's heartbeat. Alive, surviving, fighting, just like she'd always done. And Marco would make damn sure she never had to fight alone again. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds in pale stripes, painting Elena's face in alternating bands of light and shadow. Marco hadn't moved from his chair in 6 hours. His suit was rumpled, dried blood still staining the cuffs of his white shirt, but he didn't care. Every few minutes, he checked the monitor beside her bed. He watched the steady rhythm of her heartbeat like it was the most important thing in the world, because it was. Santo had brought coffee an hour ago, but it sat untouched and cold on the windowsill. Marco's entire focus remained on the woman in the hospital bed, waiting for her eyes to open, terrified of what he might see in them when they did. Would she look at him differently now? Would she finally understand that loving him meant living in constant danger? Would she realize that Adrian's obsession had only become lethal because Marco had inserted himself into her life? The question circled his mind like vultures. At 7:15, Elena's eyelids fluttered. Marco leaned forward immediately, his hand tightening carefully around hers. Elena. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found his face. For a moment, she just stared at him, and Marco felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Then her lips curved into the smallest smile, and she squeezed his hand. You stayed, she whispered. Her voice was rough and damaged from the rope's pressure. Don't talk, Marco said gently, reaching for the cup of water the nurse had left. Your throat needs to rest. She accepted the straw he held to her lips, taking careful sips, then pushed it away. How long? About 8 hours since we got here. You've been asleep for 6. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck. She tried to laugh but winced, touching her bandaged throat. Is he dead? The question was direct, unflinching. So very, Elena. No, he's in custody. Shattered kneecap, among other things. He'll stand trial. Something flickered in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or disappointment. You didn't kill him for me. You asked me not to. So since when do you take orders from a school teacher? Her attempt at levity was undercut by the pain in her voice, but Marco saw what she was doing. She was trying to be strong, to not let what happened break her. It made him love her even more. Since the school teacher became the most important person in my world, he said quietly. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Marco, don't cry, Amor. Please don't cry. These are good tears. She wiped at them with her free hand, frustration crossing her face. I'm not weak. I'm not broken. I was so scared I'd never see you again. Marco stood and carefully sat on the edge of the bed, gathering her against his chest as gently as he could manage. She buried her face in his shoulder, and he felt her body shake with silent sobs. I'm sorry, he murmured into her hair. I'm so goddamn sorry, Elena. This is my fault, if I had stopped. She pulled back to look at him, her brown eyes fierce, despite the tears. Adrian did this, not you. He's been hunting me for 3 years, long before I ever met you. You saved my life, Marco. Twice now. I shouldn't have had to. You should never have been in danger in the first place. We don't get to choose safe, easy lives. Elena's hand came up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the dark circles under his eyes. I chose you knowing exactly who you are. I'm not some naive girl who thinks love conquers all. I know your world is dangerous, but I also know that you're the man who came for me when I sent that text. You're the man who hasn't left my side since. I'm the reason Adrian escalated, Marco said, the words tasting like acid. He took you to get to me. He took me because he's a psychopath who can't accept no for an answer. She held his gaze steadily. Don't you dare take responsibility for his choices. And don't you dare use this as an excuse to push me away, thinking it's for my own good. I get to decide what risks I take. Marco wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she deserved better than a life lived in the crosshairs of his enemies. But looking into her eyes, seeing the determination there, he recognized something he'd seen in the mirror his whole life. Stubbornness, refusal to be controlled, the absolute conviction that her choices were hers alone. You're sure? He asked. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be known as mine, my weakness, my vulnerability. Anyone who wants to hurt me will come for you, then make sure they're too afraid to try. Elena's voice was rough but steady, and teach me to protect myself better. I won't be helpless again, Marco. Never again. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Castellano entered, her expression professionally neutral as she took in the sight of Marco sitting on the hospital bed, with Elena in his arms. I need to examine my patient, she said. Alone, preferably. Marco started to protest, but Elena squeezed his hand. It's okay. I'm not going anywhere. He stood reluctantly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'll be right outside. In the hallway, Santo was waiting with fresh clothes and an update. Marco changed quickly in the bathroom, grateful to be rid of the blood-stained suit. Then he listened as his second-in-command laid out the situation. Adrian Valente is in the prison ward at Cardarelli Hospital under guard. Jeppy wants to meet. He's called 3 times in the last hour. Marco's expression hardened. Let him wait. Boss, he's threatening. I don't care what he's threatening. His son kidnapped and tortured Elena. If Jeppy had controlled his psychotic offspring in the first place, none of this would have happened. Marco's voice was cold enough to frost glass. He wants to talk. He can come here to me, and he can bring a very good apology. Santo nodded, pulling out his phone to relay the message. Marco paced the hallway, his mind already working through the political implications. The Valente family had influence, not as much as the Ducas, but enough to cause problems if they decided to push back. Jeppy would want to protect his son. Spin this somehow to minimize damage, but Marco wasn't in a forgiving mood. 20 minutes later, Dr. Castellano emerged from Elena's room. She's doing well, all things considered. The damage to her throat is superficial, painful, but healing. The bruising will take time. Psychologically, she seems remarkably resilient, but I'd recommend she speak with someone. Trauma has a way of manifesting later. Whatever she needs, Marco said. Money isn't an issue. I gathered that from the private room and round-the-clock security you've posted. Dr. Castellano's tone was dry. She can be discharged tomorrow if there are no complications, but she needs rest, pain management, and no stress. Can you ensure that? Marco thought about Jeppe Valente's impending visit and the war that might be brewing. Yes, I'll make sure of it. When he returned to Elena's room, she was sitting up slightly, looking out the window at Naples, sprawling below. The morning light caught in her dark hair, and despite the bandages and bruises, she was beautiful. The doctor says you can leave tomorrow, Marco said, settling back into his chair. Good. I hate hospitals. Elena turned to look at him. What aren't you telling me? What makes you think, Marco? She gave him a look that would have done his own mother proud. I've spent 3 months learning to read you. Something's wrong. What is it? He debated lying, protecting her from the complications. But Elena had just told him she deserved to make her own choices. That included knowing the truth. Jeppe Valente wants to meet. He's Adrian's father, the businessman. Elena's voice was flat, the one who taught his son that power means you can take whatever you want. Yes, what does he want? To negotiate? Probably. To minimize damage to his family's reputation. To make this go away quietly. Marco's jaw clenched. He's not getting what he wants. Will there be a war? The question was pragmatic, not frightened. Maybe. Depends on how stupid Jeppe is feeling. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, I want to testify. When Adrian goes to trial, I want to stand up and tell everyone what he did, what he's been doing for 3 years. Elena, no. Her voice was firm despite its roughness. You said I get to choose. This is my choice. He doesn't get to hide behind his father's money and influence. He doesn't get to make me disappear like I'm nothing. I survived, Marco. I get to tell that story. Pride swelled in Marco's chest, mixing with fear and love and a fierce protectiveness that bordered on violence. Okay, but you do it safely, with protection, with lawyers who make sure you're not torn apart on the stand. Deal. She held out her hand like they were negotiating a business arrangement. Marco took it, bringing her knuckles to his lips. You're extraordinary. You know that? I'm stubborn. There's a difference. I'm beginning to think they're the same thing. The moment was interrupted by raised voices outside the room. Marco was on his feet instantly, his hand moving instinctively to where his gun would have been if hospital security hadn't required him to leave it with Santo. The door burst open, and Jeppe Valente strode in like he owned the building. He was a large man in his 60s, expensively dressed with the kind of presence that came from decades of commanding respect through fear and money. 2 bodyguards flanked him, their hands hovering near weapons that Marco knew would be there despite hospital rules. Duca. Jeppe's voice boomed. We need to talk now. Marco positioned himself between Jeppe and Elena's bed, his body language screaming threat. You don't come into her room. You don't even look at her. We talk outside, or we don't talk at all. Your men put my son in the hospital with a shattered kneecap. Your son put my woman in the hospital after kidnapping and torturing her. Marco's voice was dangerously quiet. Count yourself lucky he's still breathing. Jeppe's face reddened. This is exactly the kind of escalation I came here to prevent. We can resolve this quietly. Compensation for the woman, medical bills covered. Adrian goes to rehab or something. No, the single word cut through Jeppe's bluster like a knife. No, Jeppe sputtered. You can't just... Adrian Valente is going to stand trial for kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. He's going to be exposed for exactly what he is, and your family's reputation is going to suffer for enabling him. Marco took a step forward, and even with bodyguards flanking him, Jeppe retreated slightly. Those are the facts. The only thing we're negotiating is whether you accept this gracefully or whether I dismantle everything you've built piece by piece. You're threatening me in a hospital. I'm stating reality. Marco's smile was cold. You raised a monster, Jeppe. You gave him money and power and taught him that consequences were for other people. Now he's going to learn differently, and you get to decide if you learn that lesson with him or if you cut your loss and survive. Behind Marco, Elena spoke. Her damaged voice still carried authority. He stalked me for 3 years, Mr. Valente. He sent men to watch my apartment. He got me fired from 2 jobs by harassing my employers. He threatened my family, and when none of that worked, he kidnapped me and spent hours trying to break me. She paused, letting the words sink in. Your son is a danger to every woman who tells him no. The question is whether you're going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. Jeppe stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Maybe it was the first time he'd actually heard what Adrian had done from a victim's perspective. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in Elena's ruined voice. Or maybe it was just the calculation of a businessman realizing which side of this fight would cost him less. If I let this proceed, Jeppe said slowly, my family loses face. We look weak. You look like you have standards, Elena countered. You look like a father who won't protect a son who tortures women. That's not weakness. That's strength. Jeppe's jaw worked. His bodyguard shifted nervously, waiting for orders. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Finally, Jeppe nodded. He goes to trial, I won't interfere. But Duca, this ends it. No retaliation against my other business interests. We go back to the old boundaries. Agreed, Marco said. As long as you control your people and make sure no one decides to avenge Adrian's honor. Done. Jep turned to leave, then paused at the door, looking back at Elena. For what it's worth, Miss Rossi, I didn't know. I thought Adrian was just heartbroken. He told me you left him unfairly, that he was trying to win you back. He shook his head. I should have looked closer. I'm sorry you paid for my blindness. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was something. When Jeppy and his men left, Marco exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. Well, Elena said quietly, that was intense. Marco turned to her, taking in her pale face, and the way her hands trembled slightly despite her brave words. You shouldn't have had to face him. I wanted to. I needed him to see me as a person, not a problem to be solved with money. She held out her hand and Marco returned to her side. Did I do okay? You were perfect. He kissed her forehead gently, but now you need to rest. Doctor's orders. Bossy. One of my many flaws. Elena's smile was tired, but genuine. I'm starting to think I like your flaws. Over the next 24 hours, Marco barely left Elena's side. He fielded calls from his lieutenants, handled business that couldn't wait, and coordinated security arrangements for Elena's discharge. Santo brought updates on Adrian's condition and the police investigation, which was proceeding exactly as planned, thanks to well-placed influence and carefully managed evidence. Elena slept fitfully, waking sometimes with nightmares that left her gasping. Each time Marco was there holding her hand, murmuring reassurances until she drifted back under. During her waking hours, they talked. Not about the attack or Adrian or the dangerous future, but about smaller things. Elena told him about her students, the bright ones and the struggling ones, the boy who wrote poetry, and the girl who asked questions that made Elena rethink everything she thought she knew about literature. Marco found himself telling her about his childhood before the violence and territory wars consumed everything. About his mother, who died when he was 12, and how she used to read to him from books of Italian folklore. About the version of himself that might have existed if different choices had been made. Do you regret it? Elena asked during one of these conversations. The life you chose? Marco considered the question seriously. I didn't choose it exactly. I was born into it. My father ran the docks, his father before him. When you grow up in that world, the choice is succeed or die. I chose to succeed. But if you could go back, if you could choose differently, then I wouldn't be the man sitting here. I wouldn't have the power to protect you. I wouldn't have been in that alley the night Adrian attacked you the first time. He met her eyes. So, no, I don't regret the path that led me to you, even knowing what it cost. The cost was paid long before we met, Elena. My soul was compromised years ago. But you make me think maybe redemption isn't completely out of reach. She laced her fingers through his. I don't need you to be redeemed, Marco. I just need you to be honest about who you are and to try to be better than you have to be. I can do that. He brought her hand to his lips. For you, I can do that. The next afternoon, Dr. Castellano signed Elena's discharge papers with explicit instructions about rest and follow-up appointments. Marco had already arranged everything. A car waiting at the private exit, security positioned along every possible route, and a destination he hadn't yet told Elena about. Where are we going? She asked, as Santo helped her into the SUV Marco sliding in beside her. Somewhere safe. Somewhere you can recover without having to look over your shoulder every minute. Elena glanced at the heavily tinted windows, the armed men in the vehicles ahead and behind them. This seems like a lot of security for a trip home. We're not going to your apartment. Marco's tone left no room for argument. That address is compromised. Adrian knew where you lived, which means his associates might too. So where? My villa. Outside the city on the coast, private, secure, and comfortable enough for you to heal. Elena processed this. You want me to move in with you temporarily until we're certain there are no remaining threats? He paused. Unless you'd prefer somewhere else, I can arrange. No. She leaned her head against his shoulder carefully, mindful of her injuries. Your villa sounds perfect. The drive took 40 minutes, winding through Naples's chaotic streets before emerging into the countryside along the Amalfi coast. The villa appeared around a curve in the road, a sprawling white structure perched on cliffs overlooking the Mediterranean, surrounded by gardens that blazed with bougainvillea and lemon trees. Oh, Elena breathed as they pulled through the gates. Marco, it's beautiful. It was my mother's favorite place. Marco helped her from the car. his arm steadying her. She always said the sound of the waves was the only thing that made the world make sense. A staff of 3 waited at the entrance, a housekeeper named Maria, a cook named Paulo, and a young woman named Sofia, who served as Maria's assistant. They'd been briefed on Elena's condition and needs, and their welcome was warm without being overwhelming. Marco showed Elena to the master suite, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sea. The afternoon sun painted everything gold, and the breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers. "This is your room?" Elena asked, taking in the king-size bed and elegant furnishings. "Our room if you want it, or I can take one of the guest suites if you'd prefer space." Elena turned to face him, her expression serious despite the bandages at her throat. "I don't want space, Marco. I want you close. I want to fall asleep knowing you're there and wake up seeing your face. Is that okay?" In answer, Marco crossed to her and cupped her face gently in his hands, kissing her with all the tenderness and controlled passion of a man who'd thought he might lose her forever. When they broke apart, Elena was smiling. "I'll take that as a yes." The first few days at the villa passed in a haze of healing and careful domesticity. Elena slept long hours, her body recovering from trauma. Marco worked from the villa's office, handling business remotely while staying close enough to check on her frequently. Maria proved to be exactly what Elena needed. Motherly without being suffocating, bringing meals and tea, and reading material without hovering. Paulo's cooking was extraordinary, and he seemed to take personal offense at Elena's small appetite, constantly producing dishes designed to tempt her into eating more. "He thinks I'm starving you," Elena said one evening, laughing at yet another elaborate meal. "This is enough food for 6 people. Paulo's expresses love through excessive portions, Marco explained, watching her pick at the risotto. "But you should try to eat more, Amor. You've lost weight." "I know." She managed a few more bites. "My throat still hurts when I swallow. It's getting better, just slowly." Marco reached across the small table on the terrace where they were dining, taking her hand.
"I wish I could take the pain away."
"You're doing enough just being here." Elena squeezed his fingers. "I keep expecting you to get restless, to need to go back to the city and your real life. This is my real life now. You are." He meant it. In the years since his father's death, Marco had lived for the empire, for power and control, and the constant chess game of criminal enterprise. But sitting here, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean with Elena, he felt something he'd never expected. Peace. A week into their stay at the villa, Elena was strong enough to walk the gardens. Marco accompanied her, keeping pace with her slower steps, ready to catch her if she stumbled. "Tell me about her," Elena said as they passed through an archway covered in climbing roses. "Your mother." Marco was quiet for a moment, surprised by how easily the memories came. She was gentle. Too gentle for my father's world, really. But she had this inner strength that nobody saw until they needed it. She ran charities, helped people in the neighborhood, taught me to read before I started school. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she died because of who my father was. A rival family wanted to send a message, so they planted a bomb in her car. The old anger stirred, but distantly now, like a fire that had burned too long to rage anymore. I was 12. After that, my father made sure I understood that softness got you killed, that the only way to survive was to be harder than everyone else. "But you're not hard, Marco." Elena stopped walking, turning to face him. "Not where it counts. You're careful with me. You're kind to your staff. You could have killed Adrian and no one would have blamed you, but you didn't, because I asked you not to." "That's all you," he said quietly. "You're changing me, Elena. Making me remember that version of myself that existed before everything got dark. I don't want to change you. I just want you to remember you get to choose who you are. Every day you get to choose." They continued walking, reaching a stone bench overlooking the sea. Elena sat carefully, and Marco settled beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "What happens when I'm healed?" Elena asked. "Do I go back to teaching, to my life in the city? What do you want to happen?" "I want." She paused, choosing words carefully. "I want to stop running. I want to stop being afraid. I want to build something real with you, if that's possible, given who we both are." Marco turned her to face him, his expression intense. "It's possible. It won't be easy, and it won't be normal, but it's possible if you're willing to accept what my life means." "Will you accept what mine means?" Elena countered. "I'm not giving up teaching, Marco. Those kids need consistency, and I need the work." I need to be more than just the crime boss's girlfriend. I wouldn't ask you to give it up. He traced her cheekbone gently. But we do it smart. Security precautions. We make sure what happened with Adrian never happens again. And what about the rest of your world? The violence, the illegal business, all of it. Marco had known this conversation was coming. I can't walk away entirely. The Empire doesn't work that way, but I can be more selective, less hands-on with the worst of it. More investment in legitimate businesses. He held her gaze. I meant what I said in the hospital. You make me want to be better than I have to be. Elena studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, we try together. And if it doesn't work, if it becomes too much or too dangerous, we're honest about that too. Deal. Marco sealed it with a kiss that started gentle and deepened into something that promised everything they had just committed to. When they broke apart, Elena was laughing softly. We're probably terrible at this. Two stubborn people from completely different worlds trying to make it work. Probably, Marco agreed. But I'm willing to find out if you are. I am. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat together, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below. The Mediterranean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Marco Duca felt something he'd thought lost forever when his mother died: hope. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in front of the bathroom mirror, carefully unwrapping the bandage from her throat. The bruises had faded from purple to yellow-green. The rope burns, healing into pale lines that Dr. Castellano promised would disappear with time. Her reflection looked almost normal again, almost being the operative word. There was something different in her eyes now, something harder that hadn't been there before Adrian's warehouse. She touched the marks gently, remembering the sensation of not being able to breathe, the panic that had clawed at her chest. Then she remembered Marco's face when he'd burst through that door, the way he'd held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. You're up early. Elena turned to find Marco leaning against the doorframe, wearing only pajama pants, his dark hair tousled from sleep. Even after 2 weeks of waking up beside him, the sight still made her heart skip. Couldn't sleep, she admitted. I've been thinking about going back to Naples, to my life. She saw his expression shift and quickly continued. Not leaving you, never that. But I can't hide here forever, Marco. I have a job, responsibilities, students who are probably wondering where I disappeared to. Marco crossed to her, his hand settling on her waist. Your principal was told you needed medical leave. The school board approved it. You have time. I know, but I don't want time. I want my life back. Elena met his eyes in the mirror. I want to prove that Adrian didn't break me, that I'm still standing. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I have to prove it to myself. She turned in his arms to face him directly. I need this, Marco. I need to walk back into that classroom and teach. I need to go to the market and the cafe and all the normal places without fear controlling every step. Marco's jaw tightened. She could see him fighting the urge to argue, to keep her locked away where nothing could touch her. But then he exhaled slowly and nodded. Okay, but we do it my way. Security precautions.
No arguments.
Elena agreed, stretching up to kiss him. Thank you for understanding. I don't have to like it to understand it. His arms tightened around her. When do you want to go back? Monday. That gives me the weekend to prepare, and I can start fresh with the new week. 3 days. Marco had 3 days to make sure Naples was safe enough for the woman he loved to return to it. That afternoon, while Elena napped in the garden, Marco convened a meeting in his office. Santo drove out from the city with 3 other trusted lieutenants. Luca, the tech specialist, Roberto, who handled security operations, and Nico, Marco's oldest friend and the man who controlled their intelligence network. She wants to go back to teaching, Marco said without preamble.
Monday. That's fast, boss. Are we ready? We will be.
Marco pulled up a map of Naples on his computer. I want full coverage on her apartment building, the school, and every route between. 24-hour surveillance, rotating teams so no one gets familiar enough to spot patterns. What about inside the school? Roberto asked. We can't exactly post armed guards in a classroom full of teenagers. No, but we can have people nearby. Maintenance workers, parents volunteering in the office, whatever blends. Marco's finger traced the streets surrounding the school. I want to know everyone who comes within 2 blocks of that building. Anyone suspicious gets flagged immediately. Luca was already typing on his laptop. I can set up facial recognition cameras at key intersections. Feed them into our monitoring system. If anyone from Adrian's known associates shows up, we'll know instantly. Do it. And Nico, what's the word on the Valente family? Nico, a compact man with shrewd eyes, leaned forward. Jep is keeping his word so far. He's distanced himself from Adrian publicly. Let it leak that the kid has problems. Adrian's still in the prison ward looking at serious charges. The prosecutor is building a case. And the trial? 2 months, maybe 3. Elena will have to testify. Nico's expression was grim. That's going to be ugly, boss. Adrian's lawyers will try to tear her apart on the stand. Marco's hands clenched into fists. Then we make sure she has lawyers who won't let that happen. Who do we know? Victoria Marches, Santo suggested. Best defense attorney in southern Italy. She's represented half the politicians in Rome and made their scandals disappear. If anyone can protect Elena on that stand, it's her. Set up a meeting this week. Marco turned back to the map. What else do we need to worry about? The usual, Nico said. A couple of territorial disputes on the east side. Some grumbling from the Rossini crew about profit splits. Nothing critical, but it'll need your attention eventually. Handle what you can. For anything that needs me personally, we do it from the city apartment. I'm not leaving Elena alone more than necessary. Marco met each man's eyes. I need you all to understand something. Keeping her safe is the priority. Not territory, not profit, not politics. Her. Clear? Crystal? Santo said, and the others nodded in agreement. They spent 2 more hours going over details, contingency plans, and backup protocols. By the time the meeting ended, Marco felt marginally better about Elena's return to Naples. Not comfortable. He doubted he'd ever be comfortable with her exposed, but better. That evening, he found Elena on the terrace wrapped in a blanket, despite the warm air, reading a battered copy of 100 Years of Solitude. She looked up as he approached, marking her page with a finger. How was your meeting? Productive. We have a security plan in place for when you go back. He sat beside her, pulling her against his side. You'll have protection, though I'm trying to keep it subtle. I appreciate that. I don't want my students scared. She paused. Will you come back to the city with me? Of course. I have an apartment there. Penthouse in Shia. It's secure, centralized. You can stay there, or I can set you up somewhere else if you'd prefer your own space. Elena set her book aside. I'd prefer to be with you. If that's okay. More than okay. Marco pressed a kiss to her temple. There's something else. The trial is going to happen in a few months. You'll have to testify against Adrian. He felt her tense. I know. I've been trying not to think about it. I've arranged for you to meet with Victoria Marches. She's one of the best lawyers in Italy. She'll prepare you. Make sure Adrian's attorneys can't blindside you. Will you be there at the trial? Every day, right there in that courtroom. His voice was fierce. You won't face him alone, Elena. Ever. She turned to look at him, her eyes suspiciously bright. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You texted me when you needed help. You trusted me. You chose me despite every reason not to. Marco cupped her face gently. The question is what I did to deserve you. Their kiss was slow and deep, tasting of salt, air, and promises. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I love you, Elena whispered. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. Not because you saved me, not because you're protecting me, but because of who you are when it's just us. The man who reads to me when I can't sleep. The man who learned to make my favorite tea. The man who looks at me like I'm his entire world. Marco's throat tightened. You are my entire world. Everything else, the empire, the power, all of it. It's just noise compared to you. They stayed there until the stars emerged, wrapped in each other, and the growing certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Monday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Elena dressed carefully in clothes she'd had Maria bring from her old apartment. A simple dress and cardigan, professional but comfortable. She debated wearing a scarf to hide the fading marks on her throat, but ultimately decided against it. The students would ask questions anyway. Better to control the narrative from the start. Marco drove her into Naples himself, with Santo following in a second vehicle. The city woke around them. Vendors setting up market stalls. Businessmen rushing to offices. Tourists already clogging the narrow streets with Cameron confusion. I forgot how loud it is, Elena murmured, watching the chaos through tinted windows. You can still change your mind, Marco offered. Take more time. No, I'm ready. She squeezed his hand, nervous but ready. The school was a weathered building in one of Naples's working-class neighborhoods, its facade covered in graffiti despite repeated cleanings. Students clustered outside, some smoking despite the rules, others huddled over phones. They looked up as Marco's expensive SUV pulled to the curb, curiosity sparking on young faces. "This is going to cause talk," Elena said, watching the students watch them. "Let them talk." Marco came around to open her door, his hand steadying her as she stepped out. To anyone observing, they looked like any couple, him protective, her composed. Only Elena could feel the tension in his body, the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats. "I'll pick you up at 3, he said loud enough for nearby students to hear. Then quietly, "Luca has people positioned. You have the panic button on your phone. Anything feels wrong, you use it. I will. Now go before my students decide you're more interesting than first period." She kissed him quickly, aware of the whispers and pointing, then turned toward the school entrance. Principal Ferrara met her in the hallway, a motherly woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Elena, it's good to see you back. Are you sure you're ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be, Angela. Your students have been asking about you. I told them you had a medical situation, but we're recovering well." Angela's gaze flickered to Elena's throat where the scarf would have been. "They're going to have questions. I know, I'll handle it." Her first class was Italian literature, a group of 15-year-olds who went silent the moment she entered. Elena set her bag on the desk and faced them, seeing the mix of concern, curiosity, and teenage awkwardness. "Good morning," she said, her voice still slightly raspy, but strong enough. "I know I've been gone for a few weeks. I know there are rumors, so let me address this directly. I was hurt by someone. I'm okay now, and I'm back because teaching you is important to me. Any questions?" A brave girl in the front row raised her hand. "Miss Rossi, was it that guy who used to wait outside school for you? The creepy one?" Elena had forgotten about that. Adrian had shown up twice last semester trying to talk to her, making the students uncomfortable. She'd reported it to Angela, who'd called the police, but nothing had come of it. "Yes, Sophia, it was him, but he's in custody now, and he won't be bothering anyone again." "Good," Sophia said fiercely, and several other students nodded agreement. Another hand went up. "Is that your boyfriend who just dropped you off? The one with the really nice car?" Elena couldn't help but smile. "Yes, that's Marco. And before you ask, no, I won't be sharing details about my personal life. Now, can we please talk about Dante?" The class settled into familiar rhythms. Discussion of Inferno, debate about symbolism, students arguing interpretations with the passion only teenagers could muster. Elena found herself relaxing into it, remembering why she loved this work. These kids, most from difficult backgrounds, came alive when talking about literature. They saw themselves in these ancient stories, found hope in characters who struggled and survived. By lunchtime, she was exhausted but satisfied. The routine was helping, the normalcy soothing. She was eating a sandwich in the teacher's lounge when her phone buzzed with a text from Marco. "How's it going?" She smiled and typed back. "Good. Students are curious but sweet. No problems." His response was immediate. "Glad to hear it. Call if you need anything." The afternoon classes passed similarly. Word had spread about what happened, and students treated her with a mix of sympathy and admiration that was oddly touching. By the time the final bell rang, Elena felt like she'd accomplished something significant. She'd reclaimed this part of her life. She'd proven Adrian hadn't destroyed her. Marco was waiting outside precisely at 3, leaning against his SUV like he belonged there. Several female students nearly walked into walls staring at him, and Elena had to suppress a laugh. "Successful first day?" he asked as she approached. "Very, though you're causing quite the stir among my students. Should I be offended they're surprised you have a boyfriend? You're a bit more impressive than the average boyfriend." She slid into the passenger seat, grateful to be off her feet. "How was your day?" "Boring meetings, tedious negotiations, the usual." He pulled into traffic. No threats, no problems. Luca's surveillance didn't flag anything concerning. "See, I told you it would be fine. One day doesn't make a trend more. But I'm glad today went well." They drove to Marco's penthouse in comfortable silence. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. Modern furnishings that somehow still felt warm. Artwork that Elena suspected was worth more than her annual salary. Maria had been there earlier to stock the kitchen and prepare the bedroom, and fresh flowers decorated every surface. I could get used to this, Elena admitted, toeing off her shoes and curling up on the leather sofa. Marco joined her, pulling her feet into his lap to massage them. Good, because I intend to spoil you whenever possible. Spoiling me and letting me work are two different things. I'm learning to balance. His hands worked magic on her sore arches. Though I still hate every second you're somewhere, I can't protect you directly. You can't protect me from everything, Marco. Life doesn't work that way. I can try. Elena studied his face, the sharp angles, the dark eyes that could be cold as winter or warm as summer, depending on who he was looking at, the mouth that could order death or whisper endearments with equal ease. What are we doing here? Really? What do you mean? I mean us. You're the head of a criminal empire. I'm a school teacher who lives paycheck to paycheck. We come from completely different worlds.
How does this work long term?
Marco was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on her feet. I don't know, he admitted. I've never done this before. Never wanted anyone the way I want you. Never imagined building a life with someone. So, we're making it up as we go, essentially. Yes. He met her eyes. Does that scare you? Terrifies me, Elena said honestly. But leaving scares me more, so I guess we figure it out together. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Elena taught her classes, returned to her routines, slowly rebuilt the normal life Adrian had shattered. Marco divided his time between legitimate business meetings and the less legitimate operations that funded his empire, always making sure to be there when Elena needed him. The security presence became invisible but constant. Elena learned to recognize the faces of Marco's people, the construction worker who always seemed to be repairing something near the school, the parent volunteer who showed up religiously to help in the office, the various drivers and maintenance staff who were just a little too attentive. At first it made her uncomfortable. Then she realized it was Marco's love language. He couldn't say the words easily, but he could make sure she was protected. He could surround her with people who would die before letting harm reach her. It should have been suffocating. Instead, it felt like being cherished. One evening, about a month after her return to Naples, Elena came home to find Marco in his office, staring at his computer with an expression she couldn't read. "What's wrong?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench. The trial date has been set, 6 weeks from now. Elena absorbed this, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety. "Okay, that's good, right? We get it over with. Victoria wants to meet with you this week. Start preparing you for testimony." Marco stood and crossed to her. "She'll ask difficult questions, Elena. Make you relive what happened in detail. It's going to be hard." "I know, but it has to be done." She stepped into his arms, letting his warmth steady her. "Will you come with me to meet with her if you want me there?" "I do. I want you there for all of it." The meeting with Victoria Marches took place in the lawyer's sleek office overlooking the city. Victoria was a striking woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "Miss Rossi," she greeted Elena with a firm handshake. "I've reviewed the case against Adrian Valente. The prosecution has a strong foundation, but his defense team will try to undermine your credibility. We need to make sure that doesn't happen." For 3 hours, Victoria walked Elena through potential questions, hostile strategies, ways the defense might try to paint her as unstable or vindictive. She was thorough, professional, and occasionally brutal in her assessments. "They'll bring up your relationship with Marco," Victoria said bluntly. "They'll suggest you fabricated or exaggerated the attack to gain protection from a powerful man."
How do you respond?
Elena had been expecting this. "I tell the truth that Marco and I met when he stopped Adrian from attacking me the first time. That our relationship developed over months of getting to know each other. That I fell in love with him, despite the complications, not because of them. And if they suggest you're a gold digger, that you targeted a wealthy criminal to improve your circumstances, then they don't know me very well." Elena's voice was steady. "I was supporting myself just fine before I met Marco. I still have my own job, my own life. I'm not with him for money or protection. I'm with him because I love him." Victoria's smile was approving. "Good. Hold on to that conviction. Juries respond to genuine emotion." She turned to Marco, who'd been sitting quietly throughout. "They'll also try to paint you as controlling, violent, potentially abusive. They'll suggest Elena is afraid to contradict you." "Let them try," Marco said coldly. Every person who knows us will testify to the truth. It's not about truth, Mr. Duca. It's about reasonable doubt. Adrian's lawyers only need to make the jury question Elena's version of events. Victoria's expression was serious. This won't be easy. Trials like this rarely are. When they finally left the office, Elena felt wrung out emotionally. Marco was quiet as they drove home, his jaw tight. "Talk to me," Elena said softly. "I hate this. I hate that you have to be dissected by lawyers, that they get to question your integrity, your choices, your relationship with me." His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to turn his knuckles white. "You shouldn't have to defend yourself for surviving." "But I do. That's how the system works." Elena reached over to cover his hand with hers. "And I can handle it, Marco. I'm stronger than they think. I know you are. That doesn't mean I have to like watching you prove it." That night, they made love with an urgency that spoke to deeper fears. That the trial might change things. That publicly dissecting their relationship might damage what they'd built. That the world might force them apart through sheer pressure. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Elena whispered into the darkness. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens in that courtroom, no matter what they say about us, you won't doubt this, won't doubt us." Marco pulled her closer, his lips against her hair. "I promise. Nothing they say can change what I know to be true. I love you, Elena Rossi." That's not up for debate. The weeks leading up to the trial crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena threw herself into teaching, into preparing her testimony with Victoria, into the routines that kept her grounded. Marco became more protective, more possessive, struggling visibly with the knowledge that soon Elena would face Adrian again. 1 week before the trial, Elena had a nightmare so vivid she woke up screaming. Marco was there instantly, holding her while she shook, whispering reassurances she couldn't quite hear over the sound of her own panicked breathing. "I can't breathe," she gasped, the words triggering memories that made everything worse. "Marco, I can't." "Yes, you can. Look at me, amor. Look at me." He framed her face with his hands, forcing her to focus on his eyes. "Breathe with me. In, out, in, out. You're safe. You're here with me. Safe." It took 10 minutes for her breathing to steady, for the panic to recede. When it finally did, she collapsed against his chest, exhausted. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize. Never apologize for this." Marco's arms tightened around her. "Bad dreams. The warehouse. The rope. Not being able to breathe." She shuddered. It felt so real. "It's not real. Not anymore. You survived it, Elena. You're here. You're alive. And in 1 week, you're going to stand up in that courtroom and make sure everyone knows exactly what Adrian Valente is. What if I can't do it? What if I freeze or panic? Or you won't, because you're the strongest person I know. Because you've already survived the worst thing he could do to you. Because I'll be right there and you won't be alone." Marco pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But if you decide you can't do it, if it's too much, we find another way. Your well-being matters more than vengeance." Elena pulled back to look at him. "It's not about vengeance. It's about justice. It's about making sure he can't do this to someone else." Her voice strengthened. "I can do this. I will do this. Then I'll be beside you every of the day." They didn't sleep again that night. Instead, they talked about fears and hopes, about the future beyond the trial, about the life they wanted to build together. As dawn broke over Naples, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elena felt something settle in her chest. Determination, resolve, the absolute certainty that she would walk into that courtroom and tell her truth no matter how painful. Because Adrian Valente had taken enough from her, he didn't get to take her voice too. The morning of the trial arrived with unseasonable rain, heavy drops battering the windows of Marco's penthouse like they were trying to break through. Elena stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy suit for the third time, her hands trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to appear calm. "Stop fidgeting," she told her reflection. "You can do this. You can." Marco appeared behind her, already dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look every inch the powerful man he was. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. "You look perfect." "I look terrified. You look strong." He met her eyes in the mirror. "And you are strong, Elena. Stronger than Adrian ever gave you credit for." She turned to face him, smoothing down his tie even though it didn't need it. "Promise me you won't do anything reckless today. No matter what his lawyers say, no matter what Adrian does, you stay calm." Marco's jaw tightened. "I'm not making promises I might not keep." "Marco, I'll try." His hands cupped her face gently. For you, I'll try, but if he so much as looks at you wrong, I can't guarantee my reaction. That's what he wants. To provoke you, to make you look dangerous and violent, so the jury doubts me. Elena gripped his wrists. Please, I need you there, but I need you controlled. Can you give me that?
The struggle played across his face.
The instinct to protect warred with the desire to give her what she needed. Finally, he exhaled slowly and nodded. I'll be on my best behavior. You have my word. Thank you. She stretched up to kiss him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Now, let's go make sure justice actually happens. The courthouse was the imposing stone building in the heart of Naples. Its steps already crowded with reporters, despite the early hour. News of the trial had spread. The son of a prominent businessman accused of kidnapping and torturing his ex-fiancée. The involvement of Marco Duca adding another layer of intrigue. Cameras flashed as Marco's SUV pulled up, journalists shouting questions that were lost in the rain. Ready? Santo asked from the driver's seat. Elena took a deep breath. Ready. Marco exited first, immediately positioning himself to shield her from the cameras. Santo and two others formed a protective barrier as they moved through the crowd. Victoria meeting them at the courthouse entrance with an umbrella and a grim expression. The media circus is worse than I expected, she said, ushering them inside. Try to ignore it. Focus on the facts, on your testimony. Nothing else matters. Inside, the courthouse hummed with activity. Lawyers conferring in hushed voices. Court officers managing crowds. The general chaos of the justice system grinding forward. Victoria led them to a private conference room where they could wait until they were called. The prosecution will call you after they establish the basic facts of the case, Victoria explained, setting her briefcase on the table. They'll walk you through what happened chronologically. Be detailed but concise. Show emotion when it's genuine, but don't let them see you break. Adrian's lawyers will be watching for any sign of instability they can exploit. What about cross-examination? Elena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Expect them to be aggressive. They'll try to rattle you to make you contradict yourself or lose your composure. Remember what we practiced. Answer only the question asked. Don't volunteer information. And if you need a moment, take it. The judge will allow reasonable pauses. Marco had been silent throughout, standing by the window with his arms crossed, radiating tension. Elena went to him, slipping her hand into his. Talk to me, she said quietly. I'm trying to prepare myself to sit in that courtroom and watch you relive the worst night of your life while I do nothing. His voice was rough. Every instinct I have is screaming to get you out of here, to handle this my way. Your way ends with bodies in prison time, Elena reminded him gently. This way ends with Adrian actually facing consequences within the system. It matters, Marco. Due process matters. I know. He turned to face her fully. Doesn't mean I like it. You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me to handle it. Before he could respond, a court officer knocked on the door. Miss Rossi, they're ready for you. Elena's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to nod. Victoria gathered her materials, and they made their way to the courtroom. Marco stayed close, his hand on the small of her back, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. The courtroom was smaller than Elena had imagined from television, but somehow that made it more intimidating. The gallery was packed with spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers. The jury box held 12 ordinary-looking people who would decide Adrian's fate, and there at the defense table sat Adrian Valente himself. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't seen him since the warehouse, and the sight of him now, cleaned up in an expensive suit, his leg in a brace from where Marco's bullet had shattered his kneecap, sent ice through her veins. He looked almost normal. Almost like the man she'd once believed she loved. Then he smiled at her, cold and possessive, and she remembered exactly what he was. Don't look at him, Marco murmured in her ear. Look at me. She did. Finding anchor in his dark eyes, and her breathing steadied. Marco took a seat in the front row directly behind the prosecution table, positioning himself so Elena would be able to see him throughout her testimony. All rise, the bailiff called, and Judge Carla Romano entered. A severe woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for running a tight courtroom. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Alessandra Key, laid out the case methodically. How Adrian had stalked Elena for 3 years, how he'd kidnapped her from her apartment, how he tortured her in an abandoned warehouse before Marco Duca's intervention saved her life. She painted a picture of obsession turned violent, of a man who believed he owned the woman who dared to leave him. Adrian's defense attorney, an older man named Tommaso Greco, countered with a different narrative. He didn't deny the facts entirely, but reframed them. A troubled young man struggling with mental health issues after a painful breakup. His actions regrettable, but not indicative of his character. His injuries at Marco Duca's hands evidence of excessive force and vigilante justice. Then it was time for testimony. The prosecution called their first witness, the doctor who treated Elena at the hospital. Dr. Castellano took the stand and described Elena's injuries in clinical detail. Severe bruising to the throat consistent with strangulation, contusions on the ribs and back, rope burns, signs of prolonged physical trauma. Her testimony was matter of fact but damning. 2 police officers followed, describing the scene at the warehouse, the evidence collected. Adrian's condition when he was taken into custody. Then Alessandra called Elena's name. The prosecution calls Elena Rossi to the stand. Elena stood on legs that felt like water. Marco caught her eye and nodded once, his expression fierce with pride and protectiveness. She walked to the witness stand, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Miss Rossi, Alessandra began gently. Can you tell the court how you first met Adrian Valente? Elena took a breath and began. We met 4 years ago at a charity fundraiser. He seemed charming, interested in my work as a teacher. We started dating about a month later. And how would you describe that relationship? At first, it was wonderful. He was attentive, generous, romantic. But about 6 months in, things changed. He became possessive, jealous. He wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was with. If I didn't answer his calls immediately, he'd show up at my apartment or my school. Did this behavior escalate? Yes. He started going through my phone, my emails. He accused me of cheating constantly, even though I'd never been unfaithful. He isolated me from my friends. They were trying to turn me against him. Elena's voice remained steady, despite the memories flooding back. When I tried to end the relationship, he threatened to hurt himself. Then he threatened to hurt me. Alessandra guided her through the breakup, the 3 years of stalking that followed, the constant fear of Adrian appearing wherever Elena went. Elena described changing apartments 4 times, losing 2 jobs, because Adrian's harassment made her employers uncomfortable. The police reports that went nowhere because Adrian was careful never to do anything quite actionable enough. Then you met Marco Duca, Alessandra said. Can you describe those circumstances? Elena's eyes found Marco in the gallery. I was leaving work late one evening when Adrian cornered me in an alley. He had a friend with him. They were drunk. Adrian grabbed me, said we were getting back together whether I liked it or not. I tried to fight him off, but her voice wavered slightly. Marco intervened. He stopped them, made Adrian leave, drove me home to make sure I was safe. And your relationship with Mr. Duca developed from there? Not immediately. At first, he just checked in occasionally to make sure Adrian wasn't bothering me. Then we started talking more, having coffee, getting to know each other. Elena's expression softened. I fell in love with him over months, not because he protected me, but because of who he is when we're alone. Because he sees me as an equal, not a possession. Alessandra walked her through the growing relationship, then to the night of the kidnapping. Elena's hands gripped the edge of the witness box as she described waking to find Adrian in her apartment. The chloroform-soaked cloth over her face, the terror of consciousness fading. When you woke up, where were you? In a warehouse, tied to a chair. Adrian was there with 4 other men. Elena's voice dropped but didn't break. He said I'd rejected him for the last time. That if he couldn't have me, no one would. That he was going to make me regret choosing Marco over him. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the journalists had stopped scribbling. What happened then, Miss Rossi? He hurt me, simple words for unspeakable reality. He hit me. His men held me while he asked questions about Marco, about our relationship, about whether I'd chosen a criminal over him. When I wouldn't answer the way he wanted, he tightened a rope around my throat until I couldn't breathe. Elena touched her neck unconsciously. He'd loosen it just before I passed out, then tighten it again. Over and over. He said he wanted me to understand what it felt like to lose everything the way he'd lost me. How did you escape? I didn't. I managed to send a text to Marco with my location. Then I waited, praying he'd find me in time. Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice remained controlled. Marco came. He and his men stormed the warehouse. Marco shot Adrian in the leg to make him release the rope. Then he carried me out and took me to the hospital. Alessandra asked a few more clarifying questions, then turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Romano looked at the defense table. Mr. Greco, your witness. Tommaso Greco stood, and Elena braced herself. The defense attorney approached with a sympathetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Rossi, I'm sorry for what you experienced, truly, but I need to ask some difficult questions. His tone was gentle, almost grandfatherly. You mentioned that Adrian became possessive early in your relationship. Why didn't you end things then? Elena paused, collecting her thoughts. I thought I could help him, that if I was patient, if I loved him enough, he'd get better. It's a common trap in abusive relationships. Abusive relationships, Greco repeated. You've used that term several times. Did Adrian ever hit you before the night in question? Not physically strike me. No, but abuse isn't just physical. He was emotionally and psychologically abusive for years, I see. And after you ended the relationship, you claim he stalked you for 3 years. But you never obtained a restraining order, correct? I tried twice. Both times the judges said there wasn't enough evidence of immediate threat. Interesting. Greco consulted his notes. Now, you met Marco Duca when he intervened in an altercation with Adrian. Mr. Duca is known to law enforcement as the head of a significant criminal organization. Didn't it concern you to become involved with such a man? Elena kept her voice level. I'm aware of Marco's reputation. I'm also aware that he's never been convicted of any crime and that he treats me with respect and kindness. Respect and kindness? Greco echoed. Miss Rossi, isn't it possible that you saw an opportunity? A powerful man who could protect you from Adrian, provide for you in ways a teacher's salary never could. No. Elena's tone was sharp. I have my own career, my own income. I didn't need Marco's money or protection. I chose him because I love him. But you do accept his protection now, don't you? His men guard you. He houses you in his penthouse. You've become dependent on him. Objection, Alessandra called. Relevance. I'm establishing Miss Rossi's credibility and potential bias, Your Honor, Greco argued. Judge Romano considered. I'll allow it, but make your point quickly, counselor. Greco turned back to Elena. You claim Adrian tortured you, but isn't it true that Mr. Duca shot my client without provocation? That he used excessive force in what could have been resolved peacefully? Elena stared at him incredulously. Resolved peacefully? I was being strangled. I couldn't breathe. Marco saved my life. Or Mr. Duca saw an opportunity to eliminate a rival, to consolidate his claim on you by making you grateful. That's not what happened. Elena's composure cracked slightly, anger bleeding through. Adrian kidnapped me. He tortured me. He would have killed me if Marco hadn't arrived when he did. Nothing you say changes those facts. Facts. Yes, let's talk about facts. Greco's tone sharpened. Fact. You were found in a warehouse known to be in disputed territory between the Duca and Valente families. Fact. Marco Duca has a history of violent enforcement. Fact. You now live under his protection and influence. Isn't it possible, Miss Rossi, that you're telling the story Mr. Duca wants you to tell? Elena felt rage building in her chest, white-hot and clarifying. You want to know what's possible, Mr. Greco. It's possible that you're defending a man who derives pleasure from hurting women. It's possible that you're trying to paint me as a liar to protect your client's reputation. It's possible that you don't actually care about truth or justice. She leaned forward slightly. But here's what's certain. Adrian Valente kidnapped me. He tortured me. He nearly killed me. And I won't let you twist that into something. It wasn't just because it's convenient for your defense. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Romano's gavel cracked down. Order. The witness will refrain from editorializing. Mr. Greco, move on or sit down. Greco asked a few more questions, trying to poke holes in Elena's timeline and details, but she held firm. Victoria had prepared her well. When he finally dismissed her, Elena felt wrung out but victorious. She'd told her truth. The jury would decide what to do with it. As she stepped down from the witness stand, her eyes found Marco's. The pride and love in his expression gave her the strength to walk back to her seat, with her head high. The trial continued with more witnesses. Neighbors who'd heard the commotion at Elena's apartment, forensic experts who confirmed the evidence of torture. Even one of Adrian's own men who'd been offered immunity in exchange for testimony. He described Adrian's obsession with Elena, the planning that went into the kidnapping, the cold calculation with which Adrian had hurt her. Through it all, Adrian sat stone-faced at the defense table, occasionally whispering to his lawyers, but showing no remorse. Elena forced herself not to look at him, focusing instead on Marco's steady presence in the gallery. On the third day of testimony, the prosecution rested. The defense called their witnesses. A psychiatrist who testified that Adrian suffered from depression and abandonment issues, stemming from his mother's death when he was young. Former friends who claimed he'd always been gentle and kind. Character witnesses who painted him as a troubled soul rather than a violent criminal. Then, against his lawyer's advice, Adrian took the stand. Mr. Valente, his attorney, began. Can you tell the court what happened the night in question? Adrian's voice was smooth, practiced. I was trying to talk to Elena. I knew she'd started seeing Marco Duca, and I was worried about her. Everyone knows what kind of man Duca is. I thought if I could just explain, she'd understand she was making a mistake. And how did you intend to do that? I went to her apartment to talk. She was upset, not thinking clearly. I suggested we go somewhere quiet to discuss things. She agreed. Adrian's expression was earnest, almost believable. We went to the warehouse because I knew it would be private, but then Duca's men showed up. They attacked us. I was trying to protect Elena when Duca shot me. Elena's hands clenched into fists. The lies were so smooth, so plausible if you didn't know the truth. Alessandra's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Valente, if Miss Rossi agreed to come with you, why was chloroform found in your vehicle? Adrian hesitated. I don't know. Someone must have planted it, and the rope burns on her throat. How do you explain those? I don't know. Maybe Duca's men did that to make me look guilty. You're suggesting Mr. Duca's men tortured Miss Rossi to frame you. It's possible. He wanted me out of the way. Interesting theory. Then why did multiple witnesses, including members of your own crew, testify that you planned this kidnapping, that you discussed ways to hurt Miss Rossi? Adrian's composure slipped. They're lying. Duca got to them, paid them off, or threatened them. Mr. Valente, you've blamed everyone but yourself. The evidence, the witnesses, even physical injuries documented by medical professionals. None of this is your fault. I loved her. Adrian's voice rose, genuine emotion finally breaking through the practiced lies. I loved Elena, and she chose a criminal over me. She deserved. He caught himself, but too late. She deserved what, Mr. Valente? To be punished, to be hurt. Adrian's lawyer stood quickly. Objection. The prosecution is badgering the witness. Judge Romano looked skeptical, overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Valente. Adrian's face had gone red. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant she should have chosen better. By better, you mean you? Yes. I would have taken care of her, protected her, given her everything, even if she didn't want it. She didn't know what she wanted. She was confused, manipulated by Duca. So you decided to make the choice for her, to take away her agency, her freedom, her ability to say no. That's not. I didn't. Adrian was spiraling now, his carefully constructed defense crumbling. I loved her. Love means fighting for someone, even when they don't understand. Love doesn't mean kidnapping and torture, Mr. Valente. That's called abuse. The courtroom was silent, except for Adrian's heavy breathing. Alessandra let the moment hang, then quietly said, "No further questions." When Adrian stepped down, he looked diminished. The mask of reasonability shattered. Elena felt something release in her chest. The fear that somehow his lies would be believed. The charm and money would let him escape consequences again. Closing arguments came the next day. Alessandra was passionate and precise, laying out the evidence piece by piece, destroying Adrian's defense with facts and testimony. Greco tried to salvage his client's case, leaning hard on reasonable doubt and the complications of Marco's involvement, but even he seemed to know it was a losing battle. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Elena waited in the conference room with Marco, Victoria, and Santo, unable to eat or focus on anything. Marco held her hand the entire time, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you did everything right. You were brave and honest and strong. I'm so proud of you. What if they don't believe me? What if he walks free? Then we handle it differently." Marco's voice was dark, but I don't think that's going to happen, Amor. The jury saw who he really is. When the call came that the jury had reached a verdict, Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. They filed back into the courtroom, taking their seats as Judge Romano called for order. Has the jury reached a verdict? She asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of kidnapping. How do you find guilty? On the charge of aggravated assault. Guilty. On the charge of attempted murder. Guilty. The words seemed to echo through the courtroom. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, relief so intense it was almost painful. Behind her, Marco's hand squeezed her shoulder. Adrian's face had gone white. His lawyers were already preparing appeals paperwork. But Judge Romano wasn't finished. Mr. Valente, you will remain in custody pending sentencing. Given the severity of these crimes and your family's resources, I consider you a flight risk. Bail is denied. She struck her gavel. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom erupted into noise, journalists rushing for the exits, spectators reacting, bailiffs moving to take Adrian into custody, Elena turned to Marco. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly while she shook with relief and tears. It's over, he murmured into her hair. It's finally over, Amor. You did it. You won. We won, she corrected, pulling back to look at him. I couldn't have done this without you. Victoria approached, her professional composure cracked by a genuine smile. Congratulations. That was one of the strongest testimonies I've ever seen. The jury believed you completely. Outside the courthouse, the media circus was in full force. Cameras flashed as Victoria made a brief statement about justice being served, and Elena's courage in testifying. Elena stood beside her, Marco's hand on the small of her back, and faced the cameras without fear. This was her victory. Her moment of reclaiming the narrative Adrian had tried to control. When a reporter shouted a question about her relationship with Marco, she answered clearly, Marco Duca is the man I love. He saved my life, yes. But more importantly, he's shown me what it means to be truly valued and respected. I make my own choices, and I choose him. The ride back to the penthouse was quiet, both of them processing the weight of what had just happened. When they finally reached the privacy of Marco's home, Elena kicked off her heels and sank onto the sofa with a long exhale. I can't believe it's actually over. Marco poured them both wine, settling beside her. Sentencing is in 3 weeks, but yes, the hard part is done. Adrian will spend the next decade minimum in prison. Good. Elena accepted the wine glass, taking a long sip. He can't hurt anyone else now. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the tension of the past months finally beginning to drain away. Then Marco sat down his glass and turned to face her. Elena, there's something I need to say. Something I've been thinking about since the trial started. Okay. She set down her own glass, giving him her full attention. Watching you in that courtroom, seeing your strength and courage, it made me realize something. You deserve better than what I can offer you. You deserve a normal life free from the complications of my world. You deserve someone who can give you safety without armed guards. Love without the constant shadow of violence. Marco's voice was rough with emotion. I love you enough to let you go if that's what's best for you. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then to his surprise, she laughed. Marco Duca, you're an idiot. What? Did you miss the part where I publicly declared my love for you on the courthouse steps? Where I told a room full of people, including a defense attorney trying to tear me apart, that I chose you. She cupped his face in her hands. I don't want normal. I don't want safe and boring and predictable. I want you, all of you, the dangerous parts and the gentle parts and everything in between. Elena, no. Listen to me. I know who you are. I know what you do. I'm not naive or blinded by love or whatever, Adrian's lawyer tried to suggest. I'm a grown woman making an informed choice. Her eyes were fierce. I choose you, Marco. Every day I choose you. So stop trying to be noble and push me away for my own good. Marco's throat worked. I'm terrified of losing you, of my world destroying you the way it destroyed my mother. Your mother didn't have a choice about the life she married into. I do. And I choose this. I choose us. Elena's voice softened. Trust me to know my own mind. Trust that I'm strong enough to handle whatever comes. For a moment, Marco just looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers for any hint of doubt or fear. Then he kissed her with all the passion and devotion of a man who'd finally accepted that he was allowed to keep something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Marco rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Elena Rossi, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I love you, too. Now promise me you'll stop trying to sacrifice our happiness for some misguided sense of honor. I promise. He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. No more pushing you away. We face everything together. Together, Elena agreed, settling against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, Naples continued its ancient rhythms. Beautiful and broken, violent and vibrant. A city of contradictions, just like the man who held her. And for the first time since that terrifying night in the warehouse, Elena felt truly free. Free from fear. Free from Adrian's shadow. Free to build a future on her own terms with the man she loved. The trial was over. Justice had been served. And their real life together was just beginning. 3 weeks after the verdict, Elena woke to find Marco's side of the bed empty. The morning sun streaming through the windows told her it was later than usual, nearly 9 o'clock. She'd slept deeply for the first time in months. Dreamless and peaceful, the weight of the trial finally lifting from her shoulders. She found him on the terrace, coffee in hand, staring out at the Naples skyline, with an expression she'd learned to recognize. He was thinking, planning, wrestling with decisions that would affect more than just the two of them. "You're brooding," she said, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. Marco turned, pulling her against his chest. "Not brooding, considering." Considering what? The future. What comes next? He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Adrian's sentencing is this afternoon. 15 years minimum, according to Victoria. After that, we can finally close this chapter." Elena nodded against his chest. "And open a new one. That's what I've been thinking about." Marco pulled back to look at her. "What do you want, Elena?" "Really want. Not what you think I want to hear. Not what seems practical. If you could build any life for yourself, what would it look like?" She considered the question seriously, looking out at the city spread before them. "I want to keep teaching. Those kids need consistency, and I love the work, but I also want more. Maybe my own school someday, focused on students who fall through the cracks of the traditional system." She met his eyes. "I want a home with you. Not just your penthouse or your villa, but our place. Somewhere that belongs to both of us. And eventually, I want a family. Children who grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally." Marco's expression was unreadable. "Children? Does that scare you?" "Terrifies me," he admitted. "The idea of bringing innocence into my world, of them paying for my sins." He stopped, jaw tight. "But the idea of building that life with you, that's the only thing that's ever made the fear worth it." Elena's heart swelled. "So, we're doing this? Really doing this? If you'll have me." Marco reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a ring. A simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the morning light. "Elena Rossi, will you marry me? Will you build this complicated, messy, beautiful life with me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, yes, absolutely, yes." Marco slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly like it had been made for her hand. Then he was kissing her, and she was laughing and crying simultaneously, overwhelmed by joy and relief and the sheer rightness of this moment. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much. I love you too, Amor, more than I have words for." They stood there wrapped in each other as Naples woke fully around them. Two people from different worlds who'd found something rare and precious in each other. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Marco's world carried dangers that wouldn't disappear just because they wanted them to, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The sentencing hearing that afternoon was anticlimactic compared to the trial. Adrian stood before Judge Romano, his expensive suit, unable to hide how much he diminished in the weeks since the verdict. The arrogance had been replaced by something smaller, more desperate. "Adrian Valente," Judge Romano said, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "you have been found guilty of kidnapping, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. These are serious crimes that caused immeasurable harm to Miss Rossi. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say?" Adrian's lawyer had clearly coached him, but when he spoke, the words came out stilted and insincere. "I regret my actions. I was not in my right mind. I hope Miss Rossi can someday forgive me." Elena, sitting beside Marco in the gallery, felt nothing at those words. No satisfaction, no anger, just a vague sense of pity for a man so consumed by his own obsession that he destroyed his life over it. Judge Romano's expression suggested she was similarly unimpressed. "Mr. Valente, your actions were not those of a man temporarily insane with grief. They were calculated, cruel, and designed to terrorize. You have shown no genuine remorse, only regret at facing consequences." She consulted her notes. "I hereby sentence you to 18 years in prison on the kidnapping charge, 15 years on the assault charge, and 20 years on the attempted murder charge to be served consecutively. That is a total of 53 years. With good behavior, you may be eligible for parole in 30 years. The number hit like a physical blow. 53 years. Adrian would be in his 80s before he had any chance of freedom. His face went ashen, and for the first time, Elena saw genuine fear in his eyes. Furthermore, Judge Romano continued, upon your eventual release, you will be permanently barred from any contact with Miss Rossi or her family. Violation of this order will result in immediate reincarceration. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Adrian's voice was barely audible. As the bailiffs led him away, Adrian's eyes found Elena one last time. She held his gaze steadily, refusing to look away or show fear. This was the last time she would ever have to see his face. The last time she would think of him as anything more than a mistake she'd survived. Then he was gone and Elena exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Outside the courthouse, they faced a smaller crowd of reporters. Victoria made a brief statement about justice being served and thanked the court for taking violence against women seriously. When Elena was asked if she had anything to add, she stepped forward. 3 years ago, I left an abusive relationship because I believed I deserved better. For a long time, Adrian Valente tried to convince me I was wrong, that I belonged to him, that my choices didn't matter. Today's sentence confirms what I've always known, that no one has the right to control another person through fear and violence. I hope my case encourages other survivors to speak up, to testify, to believe that justice is possible. She glanced at Marco, who stood slightly behind her, his presence a steady anchor. And I hope it reminds everyone that healing is possible, too. That surviving trauma doesn't mean living in fear forever. It means choosing to build something better. The reporters erupted with questions about her engagement. The ring on her finger hadn't gone unnoticed. But Victoria smoothly ended the press conference, and Marco's security efficiently cleared a path to the waiting SUV. Once they were safely inside, Elena sagged against the seat. Is it really over? Finally. It's over, Marco confirmed, taking her hand. Adrian is going to prison for longer than you've been alive. He'll never hurt you again. I know. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something else to go wrong. Marco turned to face her fully. Elena, I can't promise that life will be easy from here. My world has complications, and there will be challenges. But I can promise that you'll never face them alone, that I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you're protected, cherished, and free to be exactly who you are, even when I'm difficult. Especially then. His smile was genuine, warm. Your stubbornness is one of my favorite things about you. Elena laughed, some of the tension finally releasing. Good, because I don't plan on becoming docile anytime soon. That evening, Marco took her to the villa on the coast, the place where she'd healed after the warehouse, where they'd first truly committed to building a life together. Maria had prepared a celebration dinner, and Paolo had outdone himself with a menu that made Elena's mouth water. Over wine and pasta, they talked about the future in concrete terms for the first time. Marco explained his plans to shift more of his business toward legitimate enterprises, real estate development, restaurants, import-export operations that didn't require looking over his shoulder constantly. I'm not walking away from the family entirely, he said carefully. That's not possible, and honestly, it's not what I want. But I can be more selective about what I'm involved in. Focus on operations that don't put targets on our backs or compromise our future. Our future, Elena repeated, liking the sound of it. What does that look like to you? Marriage, obviously. His hand covered hers on the table. A home maybe here at the villa. Maybe somewhere new that we choose together. Your school if you want to build it. I have resources that could make that happen. He paused. And eventually, if you still want it, children who grow up knowing they're loved and safe. I do want it. All of it. Elena turned her hand over to lace their fingers together. But Marco, I need to know you're not just doing this for me. That you actually want a different kind of life. Not just because you think it's what I need. Marco was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I've lived in darkness for a long time. Violence, secrets, the constant calculation of who to trust and who to eliminate. It's exhausting, Elena. And it's empty. I kept doing it because it was all I knew. Because it's what my father taught me was important. He met her eyes. But you showed me there's another way. That power doesn't have to mean fear. That strength can be used to protect and build instead of destroy. So yes, I want this for myself. I want to be the man you see when you look at me, not just the reputation that precedes me. You're already that man, Elena said softly. You just needed permission to believe it. After dinner, they walked the gardens as the sun set over the Mediterranean. The air was sweet with the scent of lemon trees and jasmine, and the sound of waves against the cliffs provided a soothing rhythm.
When do you want to get married?
Marco asked, his arm around her shoulders.
I don't need anything elaborate.
Just something meaningful. Elena leaned into him. Maybe here at the villa. Something small and intimate with the people who matter most. That sounds perfect. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Though I should warn you, my family will want to make a production of it. The Ducas don't do anything small. Then we compromise. Small ceremony here for us. Bigger celebration in the city for everyone else. She grinned up at him. See, I'm already getting good at navigating your world. You're a natural. Marco stopped walking, turning her to face him. The setting sun painted everything gold, and Elena thought she'd never seen him look more handsome or more at peace. Thank you. For what? For choosing me, for fighting for us, for believing I could be more than what I was. His voice was rough with emotion. You saved my life just as much as I saved yours. Amor, you just did it more slowly. Elena stretched up to kiss him, pouring everything she felt into the contact, love and gratitude and hope and promise. When they broke apart, both a little breathless, she whispered, "We saved each other. That's what love does." The wedding took place 6 weeks later on a perfect June morning. Elena had been right about wanting something intimate. Just 20 people gathered in the villa's garden beneath an archway covered in white roses and bougainvillea. Her parents flew in from Rome, cautiously accepting of Marco after seeing how he treated their daughter. A few close friends from her teaching life attended along with Marco's inner circle. Santo, Luca, Roberto, and Nico, men who'd become unlikely friends during the trial. Elena wore a simple white dress that skimmed her curves without overwhelming them. Her dark hair loose and decorated with small flowers. No veil, no excessive jewelry except for the engagement ring Marco had given her. She didn't need ornamentation. She'd never felt more beautiful. Marco stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black suit. His expression when he saw her walking toward him one of pure awe. His hand trembled slightly when she took it, the only sign of nerves from a man who normally faced danger without flinching. The ceremony was brief and meaningful. No religious elements, just simple vows they'd written themselves about partnership and trust, about choosing each other every day, about building something worthy of the love they'd found in unlikely circumstances. "I promise to protect you without controlling you," Marco said, his voice steady and sure. "To challenge you without diminishing you, to love you in the light and the darkness, in the simple moments and the complicated ones. You are my partner, my equal, my home, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift you've given me." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her voice didn't waver. "I promise to trust you without losing myself, to support your growth while maintaining my own, to love all of you, the parts the world sees and the parts you only show me. You are my safety and my adventure, my peace and my passion. And I will spend the rest of my life building a future that honors both of us." When the officiant pronounced them married, Marco's kiss was tender and reverent. A promise sealed with witnesses, and before the sea that had seen centuries of lovers make the same commitment. The celebration afterward was joyful and relaxed. Paolo had prepared a feast, and Maria had decorated the villa until it looked like something from a dream. Elena danced with her father, with Santo, who proved surprisingly graceful, with Marco, who held her like she was something precious and irreplaceable. As the sun set and guests began to leave, Elena found herself alone with Marco on their terrace, the same place where he'd proposed months earlier. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her against his side. Incredibly, she looked up at him. "Are you?" "More than I knew was possible." Marco turned to face her fully. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." "Marco, you've already given me so much. This is different." He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "Open it." Elena did, finding legal documents inside. It took a moment to understand what she was reading, but when she did, her breath caught. "This is. You bought the building. The old school building 3 blocks from where you teach. It's been vacant for 2 years, but the structure is sound." Marco's expression was carefully neutral. like he wasn't sure how she'd react. I thought, if you still wanted to open your own school, we could renovate it. Create something specifically designed for the students who need extra support, who fall through the cracks. You'd have complete control, curriculum, hiring, everything. I'm just providing the resources. Elena stared at the documents, then at Marco, tears streaming down her face. You're serious? Completely. I've already talked to contractors. We could have it ready by next fall if we start renovations soon. He touched her face gently. You said you wanted to help more kids. This is me helping you do that. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll build your dream and let me support it. Yes. Elena launched herself at him, kissing him fiercely. Yes, absolutely. Yes, Marco. This is everything. You're everything. He corrected, holding her close. This is just bricks and mortar. You're what makes it matter. They stayed up late that night, talking about plans for the school, about the life they were building together. Marco shared details about legitimate businesses he was developing, about his decision to gradually step back from the more dangerous operations. Elena talked about her vision for students who needed second chances, about creating a space where kids felt safe to learn and grow. We could call it Nova Speranza, Elena suggested. New hope, because that's what it represents. A fresh start for students who need one. Nova Speranza, Marco repeated, testing the words. I like it. It's fitting. Months passed in a blur of renovation plans, teaching, and the slow, steady work of building a marriage. Elena discovered that being married to Marco meant navigating complexities she'd never imagined. The people who wanted access to him through her. The subtle threats that Santos handled before she even knew about them. The delicate balance of maintaining her independence while being part of Marco's world. But it also meant waking up every morning to someone who knew her completely and loved her anyway. It meant coming home to someone who asked about her students' progress and actually listened to the answers. It meant having a partner who understood both her strength and her vulnerabilities, who pushed her to grow while respecting her boundaries. The school renovations progressed quickly. Marco's contractors worked with a kind of efficiency that came from both skill and healthy fear of disappointing the boss. Elena spent hours working with architects, designing classrooms that felt welcoming instead of institutional, creating spaces where struggling students could thrive. On a cold February morning, nearly a year after their wedding, Elena stood in the main hallway of Nova Speranza and felt tears prick her eyes. The building had been transformed. Bright paint on the walls, new floors, modern technology in every classroom, a library that would rival schools with 3 times their budget, and a counseling center staffed with professionals who understood trauma. What do you think? Marco asked, coming up behind her. I think it's perfect. Elena turned in his arms. I think kids are going to heal here, learn here, grow into the people they're meant to be. That's because they'll have you guiding them. Marco kissed her forehead. When do you start interviews for staff? Next week. I want teachers who've struggled themselves, who understand what these kids face. People who see potential instead of problems. You're going to change lives, Amor. We're going to change lives, she corrected. This only exists because you believed in it. In me. Nova Speranza opened its doors that September with 40 students and 8 staff members. Elena had been nervous about whether families would trust a new school, especially one funded by Marco Duca's money. But word spread quickly through Naples' working-class neighborhoods about a place where kids who'd been written off elsewhere were given genuine chances. The students who walked through those doors carried heavy burdens. Poverty, abuse, learning disabilities that had been ignored, behavioral issues stemming from trauma. But they also carried hope, tentative and fragile, but real. Elena threw herself into the work with passion that Marco both admired and worried about. She was at the school before dawn, and often didn't leave until evening, forming relationships with students who desperately needed adults they could trust. You're going to burn out, Marco warned one evening when she came home exhausted. I'm fine, just adjusting to the new rhythm. Elena kicked off her shoes and collapsed on the sofa. But Marco, you should see what's happening there. Kids who couldn't sit still in traditional classrooms are engaging. Students who'd given up are asking questions. We're making a real difference. I know you are. I'm proud of you. He pulled her feet into his lap, massaging them like he'd done so many times before. Just don't forget to take care of yourself, too. I won't. I promise. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion and contentment wash over her. How was your day? Good, actually. We closed the deal on the restaurant group. 6 locations, all legitimate, all profitable. Marco's voice held satisfaction. Santo is going to run operations. It's exactly the kind of business I want to be focusing on. Look at us being responsible adults. Elena opened one eye to grin at him. Who would have thought? Certainly not me a year ago. Marco's expression softened. You've changed my entire life. You know that? You've changed mine too, for the better. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only came from deep familiarity and trust. Then Marco said carefully, Elena, there's something I want to discuss with you. She sat up, reading the seriousness in his tone.
Okay.
We've talked about children, about wanting a family. Eventually, he took her hand. I know you're busy with the school, and I don't want to pressure you. But I've been thinking that maybe if you're ready, we could start trying. Elena's heart skipped. They discussed this theoretically, but hearing Marco say it now, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, made it real. You're sure? You're ready to be a father? I'm terrified, he admitted, but I'm also more sure of this than I've been of anything except marrying you. I want to build this family with you, Amor. I want to see you grow our child. I want to teach them about honor and strength and how to love without conditions. He paused. But only if you want it too. Only if it's right for you. Elena thought about it seriously. The timing, the logistics, the reality of bringing a child into their complicated world. But beneath all the practical concerns was a deep, certain knowing. I want it. I want to build this family with you. Marco's smile was brilliant and genuine, the kind that transformed his whole face. Yeah. Elena laughed, throwing her arms around his neck. Let's make a baby, Marco Duca. Best idea you've ever had. They didn't conceive immediately, and Elena was grateful for the time it gave her to prepare mentally and emotionally. She hired an assistant principal for Nova Speranza, someone she trusted to share the load. She worked with Victoria to set up legal protections for their future children, ensuring they'd be shielded from the worst aspects of Marco's former life. 4 months later, Elena stared at a positive pregnancy test in the villa's bathroom, her hands shaking. Marco was in the city dealing with business, not expected back until evening. She could call him, tell him over the phone, but this moment felt too important for distance. She drove into Naples herself, the security team following discreetly, and showed up at Marco's office unannounced. His secretary tried to stop her, but Elena waved her off. It's okay, Gina. He'll want to see me. Marco was in a meeting with Santo and 2 other men when she entered. He looked up, concern immediate on his face. Elena, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Can we talk privately? He dismissed everyone without hesitation, closing the door behind them. Amor, you're pale. What happened? Elena pulled the test from her purse and held it out. For a moment, Marco just stared at it, not understanding. Then comprehension dawned and his eyes went wide. You're pregnant. We're pregnant. She searched his face for his reaction, holding her breath. Marco crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms and lifting her off the ground, spinning her gently before setting her down with careful reverence. We're having a baby. We're having a baby, Elena confirmed, laughing and crying simultaneously. Marco dropped to his knees, his hands spanning her still flat stomach, his forehead pressed against it. A baby, he whispered, his voice thick. Our baby. Elena's hands threaded through his hair, holding him close. Are you happy? He looked up at her, tears shining in his eyes. It was the first time she'd ever seen him cry. I didn't know I could be this happy. I didn't know this kind of joy existed. The pregnancy was smooth, though Elena suffered from exhaustion that made her first trimester a blur. Marco became impossibly more protective, hovering until Elena had to remind him she was pregnant, not fragile. You're carrying our child, he'd argue. That makes you both precious and fragile. I'm carrying our very sturdy child, Elena would counter. Stop treating me like I might break. But she secretly loved his protectiveness. The way his hand always found her growing belly, the way he talked to their baby every night before sleep. Nova Speranza continued to thrive under her assistant principal's capable management. Elena still taught 2 classes and handled major decisions, but she'd learned to delegate, to trust her team. 7 months into the pregnancy, Elena was in her office at the school when one of her students, a teenage boy named Matteo, who'd been expelled from 3 other schools for fighting, knocked on her door. Miss Elena, can I talk to you? Of course, Matteo. Come in. The boy sat down, fidgeting with his hands. I heard you're having a baby. I am, Elena smiled, touching her very prominent belly. In about 2 months. That's good. Matteo looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me, for believing I could be better than what everyone said I was. Elena felt her own eyes sting. You are better, Matteo. You're smart and capable and kind. You just needed someone to see that. My mom said this school saved my life, that if I'd stayed where I was, I'd probably be in jail by now. He swallowed hard. She wanted me to tell you that. And I wanted you to know that your baby is lucky because you're the kind of person who saves people just by believing in them. After Matteo left, Elena sat at her desk and cried. Hormonal pregnancy tears mixed with overwhelming gratitude for the life she'd built. The school, these students, the family growing inside her, the man who loved her completely. It was everything she'd never dared to dream possible. Their daughter was born on a rainy April morning after 12 hours of labor that tested every ounce of Elena's strength. Marco stayed beside her the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand hard enough to bruise, murmuring encouragement and love. When the doctor finally placed their daughter in Elena's arms, the world seemed to stop. She was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn brown like her mother's. She's beautiful, Marco breathed, his finger touching their daughter's tiny hand. She gripped it instinctively, and his expression crumbled. She's perfect. What should we name her? Elena asked softly. They discussed names but never decided. Now looking at their daughter's face, Marco said, Sophia after my mother, if that's okay with you. Sophia. Elena tested the name, smiling. Sophia Duca. It's perfect. The first weeks with Sophia were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Marco proved to be a devoted father, taking night feedings when he could, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his daughter like she was the greatest miracle he'd ever witnessed. I can't believe she's ours, he'd say, holding Sophia against his chest while she slept. Believe it, Elena would reply. She loved photographing them together because the sight of Naples' most feared man cradling his infant daughter with infinite gentleness was something she'd never wanted to forget. When Sophia was 3 months old, Elena returned to Nova Speranza part-time, bringing the baby with her. The students were enchanted, the staff supportive, and Elena discovered she could balance motherhood and her calling. On Sophia's first birthday, they threw a party at the villa, small and intimate like their wedding, with people who genuinely loved them. Elena's parents were there, fully reconciled to their daughter's choice, now that they'd seen how Marco cherished her and their granddaughter. Santo showed up with a ridiculously large stuffed bear. The staff from Nova Speranza came, bringing handmade cards from students. As Elena watched Marco blow out Sophia's birthday candle for her, their daughter clapping her pudgy hands in delight, she thought about how far they'd come. From that terrifying night in the warehouse to this moment of pure joy, they'd built something real and lasting. That evening, after guests had left and Sophia was asleep, Elena and Marco stood on their terrace watching the sunset. Do you ever think about that night? Elena asked. The warehouse, the text I sent, all of it. Sometimes. Marco's arm tightened around her. It terrifies me. What could have happened if I'd been 5 minutes later, if you hadn't managed to send that message? But you weren't late. I did send it, and we survived. Elena turned to face him. I used to think that night was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now I think maybe it was necessary to show us both what we were capable of. To prove that we were strong enough to build this. I love you, Elena Duca. Marco cupped her face gently. Thank you for texting me that night. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for choosing me in this life and building this family. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too. Elena kissed him softly, and I'd choose you again every single time. Inside, Sophia began to cry. Not distressed, just awake and wanting attention. They went to her together, Marco lifting their daughter from her crib while Elena hummed the lullaby that always soothed her. Standing there in the nursery, the three of them together, Elena felt complete. The scars from her past had healed into stories of survival. The fear Adrian had planted in her had been replaced by the certainty of being loved and protected without being controlled. Marco had transformed too, from a man who ruled through fear into someone who led with wisdom, who used his power to build instead of destroy, who discovered that true strength meant being vulnerable with the right person. Years later, when Sophia was old enough to ask how her parents met, they would tell her an edited version that her father had helped her mother escape a dangerous situation, that they'd fallen in love slowly and built a life together through trust and commitment. When she was older still, they would tell her the fuller truth, that sometimes people came from darkness but chose to walk toward light, that survival was possible even after terrible things, that love could be both the reason to fight and the reward for fighting. But for now, on this perfect evening, with their daughter drowsy in Marco's arms, and the Mediterranean breeze carrying the scent of lemons and salt, the future stretched before them, full of possibility. Elena had learned to breathe again after believing she never would. Marco had learned to hope again after years of living in calculated cynicism. Together they'd built something neither could have created alone, a family founded on choice and respect, a love that had survived the worst and emerged stronger. The message Elena had sent that terrifying night, "I can't breathe," had been a plea for rescue. But it had also been the beginning of something neither of them expected. A love story born from violence but sustained by gentleness. A partnership between two strong people who made each other stronger. As Sophia fell asleep in her father's arms, Elena rested her head on Marco's shoulder and smiled. She could breathe now, they both could. And they would spend the rest of their lives building a future worthy of the second chance they'd fought so hard to earn. The most dangerous man in Naples and the schoolteacher who'd changed him. The survivor who'd refused to stay a victim. And the protector who'd learned that real strength meant choosing mercy. Together, they'd found something more valuable than power or safety or revenge. They'd found home in each other, and that was worth everything they'd endured to get there.